Hi everyone, welcome to this short Q&A with Dr Leighan Renaud. Dr Leighan, I'm going to call you that forever now. Leighan is a lecturer in Caribbean fiction, Caribbean literature, technically, and cultures at the University of Bristol. Before we get into some of the questions, sort of reflecting on research with care, I wondered, Leighan, if you could sort of tell us a little bit about your research from your own perspective, what you do, what you're interested in.
Yeah, so I did my PhD in looking at Caribbean literature. I look at hyper-contemporary Caribbean literature, so literature from the 21st century, and I was interested in my PhD research in looking at representations of motherhood, mothering, and matrifocality, which is to say families and communities wherein women in their roles as mothers are central. And this is kind of a widely acknowledged truth of the Caribbean. So that's what I was looking at. And that research into, I guess, like family, the work of mothering is something that I'm continuing to be interested in. So, you know, alongside that, I kind of asked myself lots of questions in my research about things like the role of the archive, what the archive is, how we can respond creatively to gaps and silences in that archive. And then I guess more generally, what literature can tell us, what fiction can tell us when we have kind of wider conversations about the Caribbean.
Beautiful, so exciting. There's so much to cover. I was thinking, kind of bringing together the social component of what you study, but also these questions and conversations that we just had in a workshop about care in research. I wondered if you could maybe describe a little bit for us what for you taking care in research means, and I mean both as a researcher and in the material, whatever form that takes, that you produce.
Yeah, I think taking care, so in terms of I guess my primary materials are works of fiction always, and I think one of the ways that we can take care as researchers of literature is to try not to approach a text with the kind of sole intention of mining that text, right, for just that one little thing that we need that's going to like make our argument for us. And I think that's something that academia teaches us to do, right? That so much of the reason that we do is it kind of has to be extractive for the purposes of academia. And so taking care with these books means like sitting with them in their entirety, right? And sometimes sitting with books and not taking anything from them that you're going to kind of put into a chapter or an article or something, sometimes just sitting. I think that in itself is an act of care, right? Particularly when it comes to kind of like the secondary sources that we might engage with, and the non-fiction as well. I don't think that we always do the best job of taking care with these pieces of work that other people have taken care to produce. And so that's one of the ways I think that we can take care as researchers. And I think, yeah, I think I just always want to make sure that my work is community focused. And I think that's another way that we can think about care as researchers, right? How can my research reach a community? How can it reach the community that I'm writing about? And can it be useful to them? Can it be a source of joy? Can it be a source for debates? Can it, you know, can it do something for the community that I'm interested in? And so, yeah, these are some of the questions that I think about when I think about care as a researcher.
I guess pulling out on that then is thinking about audience, like you're talking then about, you know, producing research that addresses the community. So when you are writing, which is mainly your current output, right? But in any that you do, are you thinking about audience actively as you make it, as you do the research? Like where does audience matter to you, and if it does, where in the process does it factor?
Yeah, audience does matter. You know, academia is tricky, right? Because there are certain markers that you have to hit in order to kind of progress as an academic. So you need to create a monograph, for example, or create an article that is referable, right? And in order for it to be referable, it needs to kind of like look a certain way. And that way is not always your favorite way, but you got to do it anyway, right? So it's about, so I think about audience, I think about like accessibility to the work. I think about where I want this work to be published, how I want it to be published as well. And if I'm creating a piece of work wherein the audience is largely kind of an academic audience, can I create another piece of work alongside that will talk to your wider audience, you know? And these are some of the questions that I ask myself when thinking about audience.
I wonder a little bit about, you know, in the sort of interaction between, you know, taking care and audiences, how we navigate the academy a little bit, where we exist in these institutions. I think we both enjoy teaching, you know, and yet in many ways the forum in which we teach is not our audience. And I wonder, like, is that something that you think about as you're teaching, and how do you maybe address that? You know, that there is sometimes a disconnect between who we would speak to in our research and who we are teaching, or even like in a research seminar format, who we're speaking to and representing ourselves as well as our work to, you know, these communities that aren't necessarily the community that we think of as ours, if that makes, if you see what I mean. So I'm kind of looking at that, like, is that something that you make adjustments for, and yeah, reflections about like us repackaging ourselves but while maintaining care, I suppose, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think I'm a person who does really enjoy teaching, right? Yeah, I love it. I do love it. I love having these conversations with students. But yeah, you're right that in the academy, we're talking to people who are perhaps not our primary audience, right? Or the people that we aspire to reach with the research that we're doing. And so, sorry, do you know what? The door just went and I was like, what? Sorry, I've just completely lost my train of thought.
Yeah, absolutely fine. It was such a complicated question. I was just thinking about, you know, you teach literature mainly, and I teach film and theatre, and these are things that bring massive fandoms and also a lot of personal investment, but that's complicated. Right. How we approach our things is not in line necessarily with the environment that we're in, and I was just wondering about how we maintain care while addressing people who are not necessarily in step with us.
Yeah, interesting. It's like you have to, it feels like sometimes you have to do a lot of explaining of like yourself and your position and what it is that you're trying to do in those situations, right? Which is tiring. And so, and sometimes that's the best way to kind of maintain care for the research that you're doing. But it also means that you're kind of almost neglecting self-care, right? Because you're having to explain yourself time and time again. It gets really frustrating. I think one of the things for me is that I never want to have to explain why my research is important. And I think that's sometimes that's a question that's kind of asked of people researching Black lives. And it's I guess it's not something that I'm willing to do. So yeah, I think the question is, how do you manage to kind of not do that? I don't know. I guess I have more questions than answers, right, for this question.
I think that's literally it. I was thinking in the workshop that we just had, thinking about, you know, Black research and what other archives and so on, we talked quite a lot about silence. And one of the questions that I came away with that we didn't discuss is, where do we find silence in teaching? Because like something that I teach a lot about race and identity, and I talk a lot about positionality as a mixed race person, but with, you know, some white proximity, and like, how do we create classrooms where people who have lived life thinking they are not racialized are brought into contact with people who have no life experience of not experiencing racialization.
Yeah.
Where is the silence in that conversation where you're bringing everybody into dialogue without inevitably creating a situation where harm may be enacted? We can't prevent all harm, but I'm really conscious about care and safeguarding, both in communicating material as well as producing material. And I thought you said something about reproducing rather than producing material in the talk we gave, and like every time I say I've made something, I'm like, no, I just but yeah, I was just wondering about, for you, obviously we're speaking from teaching in Russell Group universities, which have a very specific vibes anyway, so that's important to say, but I just wondered, you know, like teaching cohorts and doing the research that you do, where is the silence? Is there silence, or do we just have to, what do you think?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Where is the silence? You know, sometimes I think it depends on the material that you're introducing these students to, right? So for example, I'm currently teaching a module called Literatures of Decolonization. And it's a fantastic module. It's not one that I convene, it's just one that I teach on, but it's beautifully designed. And it's encouraging students to kind of ask questions, not only of the text that we're looking at, but also of themselves and their position, and the institution as well. It's getting us to ask a lot of questions. But one of the texts we're looking at in that is Gloria Anzaldua's Borderlands, La Frontera. And Anzaldúa is talking about her I guess her life as living on the border of America and Mexico, right? So living in America, but that part of America formerly being a part of Mexico, right? But borders happen, you know, and you know, what does that look like to live on that border? And the book is beautiful. And one of the reasons that the book is beautiful is because it kind of mixes a whole lot of different genres, right? So there's some like nonfiction, it's part memoir, but it's also kind of theoretical, but then there's also a whole lot of poetry in it. And on top of that, the book is not solely written in English, but it's also written partly in Spanish, right? And that's the point. I can't access that entire text because I can't speak the language. And so there are massive parts of that text that are silent for me. And that's the point, right? And I think that's so beautiful, you know. I think it does so much. And so yeah, I think there's a way that we can teach silence. I think there's a way that we can teach the gaps in our knowledge and understanding by leaving them as gaps, you know.
Oh, that's a delicious example. Great. I'm going to think about that all day. I'm just thinking about, and I was sort of thinking about, as you were speaking, I was thinking about the reality that I think when I was thinking, my next question is about unlearning, and I was just thinking about actually trying to make experience and understanding universal, I think, is actually one of the shortcomings of arts and humanities at the moment, that actually that's not for you, should be a more comfortable thing to say, and it feels uncomfortable, and it's complicated because the environment of the institution, not locally, but of the institution of academia in the UK, is very much that everybody has a right to all knowledge, and I do wonder if the silence is in what isn't for you as well as what you can't access. We were talking before about a particular Black British author and our different attitudes to it, and for me, because of where I grew up, I have particular access to it that is not the same for you, but at the same time that access doesn't communicate to other people, and like it would be impossible for me to sit in a classroom if I was teaching one of these texts and be like, well, I grew up on that road, so I can tell you that XYZ, that wouldn't give the students any more sense of place or connection, just spewing an anecdote about where I grew up. And I think that's I wonder, listening to what you're saying about having multiple languages in text where not everything is accessible to everyone. I also wonder if that extends to sort of cultural and social experience. You and I have been in spaces where we've had conversations about like representations of patois, and what is there a place for it in academic writing? Obviously there is, but the question, I'm just gonna nip that in the bud before someone in the comments is like, what do you mean is there? Like, I know there's a place, but you'd be surprised. I mean, and I know how often that conversation comes up, but I wonder, I was just thinking about what you're saying about what we can access, and maybe in our research, the silence is also being clear about what we don't know. But it's okay. You can. Do you think, I'm going to ask you two more questions. Do you think that we can present finished research where we have not reached a conclusion, or where we don't know answers?
Yes. Yes, I do, and I actually think that we should all get more comfortable with that. It's okay to not know. I think sometimes it's okay to finish with a question, and let somebody else take that question forward, because what could they potentially be offering to your argument? If you leave it open-ended, if you leave it with a question, I think there's something really beautiful about that as a way of kind of encouraging, what's the word I'm looking for? Collaboration. So yeah, I do think that we can say that we've done all that we can do, and it's for somebody else to kind of continue that. And I think we should do that more often.
I was just thinking when I was listening to what you said before about when I used to teach academic skills, and we were talking about, I think it was either citation or building an argument, I can't remember now, but we had this graphic about academic research, which was a pyramid, and that in order to present your position at the top of the pyramid, you had to acknowledge each of the layers, and you were standing on top of research that had already been done. And at the time, I was like, oh, that's a really clear way of expressing the fact that we have to acknowledge what's been done before. But now I'm like, but you're standing on top of people, like the literal image that you're giving out in that analogy is, I have climbed over people to stand on top of them. And what you just described is the idea of standing alongside, that this is your contribution, and then you step back into the circle and someone else steps forward. And then I wonder if actually that's where we need to go, maybe. And this sort of links to my last question, and we'll call it my last question. Well, I want to ask you about books, but we'll see. Which was, what do you think we need as academics, as researchers, to unlearn or maybe resist in order to conduct research through care?
Mm. Perhaps this kind of idea of linearity and hierarchy that you were just talking about, this idea that that research happens in a straight line, that you read these people and then you get to a point where you've taken all of that in, you synthesized it, and you're able to kind of add something new, right? What if we thought about things more cyclically? Yeah, I do wonder what that would look like, right? This, like you said about kind of us all standing in a circle, and then we give our contribution, we step back into the circle. This, I guess, this circle of kind of co-reproducing knowledge. And I think there's something really like beautiful about this idea. And perhaps that's like incredibly idealistic way of thinking about research, but I don't know. I feel like, what are we here for if not to imagine a new way of doing things, right? And why are we recording this conversation if not to kind of, you know, encourage other people to think about new ways of doing things, ways that are kind of cognizant of care, that question of care and love in the research. So yeah, I think this idea of linearity needs to probably go away now. I think we do need to. I think we need to reconsider that. I also think we need to reconsider, I guess, like hierarchies and the way that we kind of consider how we, I guess, our interactions with the materials that we work with or the people that we interview, all of those things, just kind of reconsider hierarchy and then dismantle it.
That question is provoked by the fact that I have realized that what I've been miscasting as imposter syndrome is actually that I don't want to be an authority, and
right.
the authority comes with, and that is really complicated, because that is the idea of the expert in the academy, isn't it? Is that you are the go-to person, and like I would much rather be in conversation with people than being the only person whose voice is heard. But how you frame research and research activity through, I just want to talk to other people about things. You know, and you know, I use a diminutive voice, but it's actually not a diminutive ambition. I'm not doing down on myself, which is what I thought I was doing. And I think that is, you know, part of the unlearning, isn't it? You talking about this hierarchy and this linearity, and I find academic journeys, and both of us had quite complicated academic journeys so far, and you know, both early career academics as well, but you know, like there's this path that everybody seems to think they're going on, neither of which us have been on. Like, then, and but that I find that consciousness bleeds into the work, and I wonder if part of our intervention maybe is not letting that, is interrupting that process of, this is how it goes, this is how we produce research, this is what research looks like, this is who it's for. Maybe, I don't know. So final thoughts. Thank you so much, Leighanne, for your time. I wondered, are there any, if you could recommend 1 to 3, I won't limit you to one thing that you wish everybody would read. It doesn't have to be on the topic, but we can make it about care, if that would help. What would it be?
You are. That's a really mean question. I think I would encourage everybody in this life to read Sadiya Hartman, anything. She's got an article called, I think it's called The Plot of Her Undoing. And in fact, it might not be called The Plot of Her Undoing, but if you Google The Plot of Her Undoing, in fact, no, it is called The Plot of Her Undoing. I would encourage everybody to read that. Can I look back? What's like looking at me right now? Everyone should read Audre Lorde's Sister Outsider. Everybody should read that collection of essays. Yeah, that's really important. And I think then I would also encourage people to read anything by Dionne Brand is the final one. Maybe start with Map to the Door of No Return. Yeah, start there. That is, it's just fundamental to everything. Dionne Brand is amazing. Like, I just have nothing but like love for her work. So yeah, I think I would encourage those three. And that was a mean question, Hannah.
What's really fun is that I haven't read any of those, which is going to really offend you.
I know what you're going to start doing today.
I do have some of it, but yeah, I will write those things down in the notes of this conversation. Leighanne, thank you so much for your time and for answering, you know, difficult and messy questions that you were only partially prepped for. People can check out your socials. Didn't say at the beginning that you're also a published children's author. The book is beautiful. Go check it out. And also, there's an amazing article called Beyond the Nuclear that you published for the history workshop, right? Which I'll also put in the show notes. So if people want to hear more from you, find out more from you, those are some of the places. Thank you so much for your time and
thank you for having me.
And it's been a joy. Speak to you soon.
It has been a joy. It's always a joy. Thank you, Hannah.